The first light of dawn crept across the western frontier like a thief, stealing darkness from the jagged red rocks that stood sentinel over the valley. A hawk circled high above, its lonely cry piercing the thin morning air, echoing off canyon walls that had witnessed centuries of solitude. The wind came in waves, carrying dust and memories of forgotten trails, whispering secrets through the sparse juniper and sage that clung to life in this unforgiving land. Clara stood at the threshold of her hand-built cabin, watching the sun paint the desert floor in shades of copper and gold. At 6 feet and 8 inches tall, with shoulders broader than most men and hands that could snap a rifle stock like kindling, she cut an imposing figure against the weathered doorframe. Her hair, the color of prairie wheat, hung in a thick braid down her back, and her eyes, gray as storm clouds, surveyed the vast emptiness that had become both her prison and her sanctuary. She had built this place with her own hands, every log hauled from the distant pine forests, every stone for the foundation pulled from the creek bed during the dry season. The cabin sat nestled in a natural bowl of the valley, protected on 3 sides by towering rock formations, with only one approach visible for miles. It was perfect for someone who wished to see visitors long before they arrived, and Clara had learned the value of such foresight. The coffee pot whistled on the wood stove, pulling her from her morning vigil. As she moved through the cabin, her footsteps made the floorboards groan in protest. Everything here was built to her scale. The table stood higher than normal, the chairs reinforced with extra bracing, the bed frame fashioned from whole tree trunks. It was the first place in her 32 years where she didn't have to stoop or squeeze or apologize for the space she occupied. Clara poured her coffee into a tin cup that looked like a child's toy in her massive hands. Steam rose in the cool morning air as she settled into her chair by the window, memories unbidden rising with the vapor. She had been 12 when she first understood what it meant to be different. Back in Missouri, in the small farming settlement of Cedar Creek, she had already towered over the other children. The boys would dare each other to wrestle her, and she would win every time, confused by their anger when she did. The girls whispered behind their hands, spreading tales that her mother had lain with a giant from the old country, or worse, that she was cursed by the devil himself for some unknown sin. By 15, she stood 6 feet tall and showed no signs of stopping. Her father, a gentleman who barely reached her shoulder, tried to protect her from the worst of it. But even he couldn't shield her from the revival preacher who came through town that scorching summer, pointing at her during his sermon and declaring her an abomination, a Nephilim, one of the giants mentioned in Scripture before the flood. The congregation's fearful murmurs had burned hotter than the August sun. The final break came when she was 19. Thomas Hartley, the blacksmith's son, had been sweet on her despite everything. He was kind and didn't flinch when she walked beside him, though the top of his head barely reached her chin. For a brief, shining moment, she had dared to dream of a normal life. Then came the night of the harvest dance, when Thomas's mother had pulled him aside, her voice carrying across the barn, "No son of mine will father a litter of freaks." Clara had left that very night, taking only her father's rifle, a bag of provisions, and the $20 he pressed into her hand with tears in his eyes. She headed west, where the land was as wild and unforgiving as the life she was choosing, where a person could disappear into the vastness and create themselves anew. That was 13 years ago. 13 years of learning to hunt and trap, to read the weather and the flight of birds and the color of distant clouds. 13 years of trading with the occasional passing merchant, always keeping her distance, always maintaining the reputation of the strange hermit woman who lived alone in the valley. She had learned to break horses that others gave up for lost, her strength and patience combining to gentle even the wildest mustang. The money from selling them, along with pelts and dried meat, kept her in ammunition and the few supplies she couldn't make or grow herself. The desert had taught her its rhythms. When the flash floods would come racing through the arroyos, where to find water in the driest months, which plants could heal and which would kill. She knew every track within 20 miles of her cabin, could tell the difference between a coyote's print and a dog's. between the sign left by Apaches passing through and that of Mexican traders heading north. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters she had reinforced just last week. Clara frowned, setting down her cup. The air had a different quality this morning, heavy and electric, like the breath before a scream. She had survived enough storms to know their moods, and this one felt angry. Rising from her chair, she moved with surprising grace for someone of her size, each movement economical and purposeful. The horses in the corral were already nervous, their ears flat against their heads as they paced the fence line. Clara spoke to them in low, soothing tones as she checked their water and threw them extra feed. If a bad storm was coming, they would need their strength. By midday, the western horizon had turned an ominous brown-orange, like dried blood mixed with dust. Clara had seen sandstorms before, but this one was building to be a monster. She worked quickly, securing everything that could blow away, bringing the horses into the reinforced stable she had built into the hillside, covering the well, and hauling extra water inside. As she made her final preparations, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that this storm was bringing more than just sand and wind. There was a change coming, riding in on those roiling clouds. She had lived alone long enough to trust her instincts, and right now, every nerve in her body was singing a warning. The first gusts hit just as she barred the cabin door, sand hissing against the walls like 1,000 angry snakes. Clara lit the oil lamps, their warm glow pushing back the premature darkness as the storm swallowed the sun. She checked her rifle, counting ammunition from habit more than real concern. Whatever was coming, she would face it as she had faced everything else in her life, alone, unbowed, and on her own terms. Outside, the storm began to howl in earnest, and somewhere in that wild keening, Clara could swear she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. The pounding at her door came just as the storm reached its full fury. Clara's hand moved instinctively to the Winchester propped against the wall, her fingers closing around the familiar stock. Through the howling wind, she could hear horses snorting and men's voices, urgent and desperate. "Please, anyone in there? We need shelter!" The voice was hoarse, fighting against the storm's roar. Clara remained silent, watching the door. In her experience, desperate men were the most dangerous kind. The pounding came again, more frantic this time. "We mean no harm. The storm. We'll die out here." She moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. In the swirling sand and fading light, she could make out 5 figures huddled against the side of her cabin, their horses pressed close to the wall. The men had their faces wrapped in bandanas, hats pulled low, but she could see they were in bad shape. One was supporting another who seemed barely able to stand. Clara weighed her options, turn them away and have their deaths on her conscience, or risk letting unknown men into her sanctuary. The storm made the decision for her as a piece of debris slammed into her roof with a thunderous crack. "Step back from the door," she called out, her deep voice carrying even over the wind. "And keep your hands where I can see them." She lifted the heavy bar and opened the door just enough to peer out, rifle barrel visible. 5 men stood in the sand-filled air, and true to their word, their hands were raised despite the battering wind. The one being supported was bleeding from a gash on his forehead. "Inside, quick!" Clara stepped back, keeping the rifle trained on them as they stumbled through the doorway. "Guns on the table, now!" They complied without argument, laying down an assortment of Colts and 1 Spencer repeating rifle. Clara noted their weapons were well maintained, but not fancy. Working men's tools, not gunslinger showpieces. Once the door was barred again, she got her first good look at her unexpected guests. They were a mixed bunch, united only by the dust that coated them all equally. The injured man, who they eased onto her floor, looked to be the oldest, maybe 40, with silver threading through his dark beard. He was conscious but dazed, blood painting half his face crimson. "Name's Jed Carson," said the man who had been supporting him. He was tall and lean, with a kind of weathered face that spoke of years under the sun. His eyes, a pale blue, met Clara's directly, showing wariness but no deceit. "That's Sam Winters. He took a bad fall when his horse spooked." The others introduced themselves as they shook dust from their clothes. Miguel Santos, compact and wiry with quick dark eyes that took in everything. Enoch Price, a mountain of a man, though still a head shorter than Clara, with scarred hands and a broken nose that had healed crooked. And Levi Abrams, the youngest by Clara's guess, perhaps 25, with sandy hair and a nervous energy that reminded her of a half-broken colt. "Clara," she said simply, not offering more. She set the rifle within easy reach and moved to examine Sam's wound. The men watched in barely concealed amazement as she knelt beside their injured companion, her size now impossible to ignore in the close quarters of the cabin. "You got medical supplies?" Jed asked. "Recovering first. I've got what's needed." Clara's hands were gentle despite their size as she probed the wound. "Get that small chest from the shelf. No, the other one. And heat some water." The men moved to help, and she noticed how they worked together with practiced efficiency. These weren't strangers thrown together by circumstance. As she cleaned and dressed Sam's wound, Clara listened to their careful conversation, piecing together fragments of their story. They were running from something or someone. The glances they exchanged, the way Enoch kept checking the barred door, the tension that hadn't left their shoulders even in shelter, all spoke of men with trouble on their heels. "You boys seem to be riding hard in dangerous weather," Clara observed, tying off the bandage. Sam groaned but seemed more alert. Jed and Miguel exchanged looks. "We had business south of here," Jed said carefully. "It went bad. The storm seemed like the lesser evil. Must have been some powerful bad business to make this storm look friendly," Clara replied, standing to her full height. Several of the men had to tilt their heads back to maintain eye contact. "Ma'am," Levi burst out, then colored red. "I mean, Miss Clara, we're grateful for the shelter. We'll be gone as soon as the storm passes." "Storm like this could last days," Clara said, moving to stoke the fire. "You boys eat today." They hadn't. She could tell by the way their eyes followed her movement to the food stores. She set about making a meal, noting how they arranged themselves around her cabin, backs to walls, clear sight lines to doors and windows. Whatever they were running from had them spooked deep. As she worked, the storm continued its assault on the cabin. The walls shook with each gust, and sand found its way through every tiny gap, covering surfaces in a fine layer of grit. The men took turns keeping watch at the windows, though visibility was near zero, over a meal of beans, salt pork, and cornbread. The tension began to ease slightly. Clara learned that Jed had been an Army scout before turning to cattle driving. Miguel had come up from Sonora as a boy and knew horses better than most men knew their own minds. Sam, when he could focus through his headache, turned out to be a former schoolteacher from Ohio who'd come west for his health and found himself caught up in rougher work. Enoch had been a lawman once, though he didn't say where or why he'd stopped. Levi was the son of a failed Kansas farmer, trying to make his stake in the world. "And what brings a woman to live alone in such a place?" Enoch asked, his gravelly voice carefully neutral. Clara met his gaze steadily. "Same as any other soul out here, looking for space to breathe." "You built this place yourself?" Miguel asked, genuine admiration in his voice as he looked around the sturdy cabin. "Every log and stone," Clara confirmed. "A person can do surprising things when there's no one around to tell them they can't." The conversation died as a particularly violent gust shook the entire structure. In the momentary quiet that followed, they all heard it. Horses approaching, many of them, their hoofbeats somehow carrying through the storm. The 5 men were on their feet instantly, hands moving to where their guns should be before remembering they'd surrendered them. Clara picked up her rifle, checking the load. "Those friends of yours?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from their faces. "The Garrison gang," Jed said grimly. "We had a disagreement about some cattle ownership down in Lincoln County." "Disagreement?" Enoch spat. "They were stealing from Mexican farmers, burning out anyone who complained. We were hired to guard a drive and wouldn't look the other way. So now they want you dead, Clara stated. That's about the size of it, Sam confirmed, swaying slightly on his feet. Clara listened to the horses outside. They were circling, looking for shelter, same as these men had been. She made a quick count, 8, maybe 10 riders. The storm was keeping them from organizing properly, but it was only a matter of time. Your guns are on the table, she said quietly. But if shooting starts in here, we'll all be dead. This storm's got them blind and confused. Best to keep it that way. You don't have to get involved in this, Jed said. It's our trouble. Clara almost smiled. Mister, you brought armed men to my door. I'm already involved. Question is, do we handle this smart or stupid? She moved through the cabin, extinguishing all but one lamp, plunging them into near darkness. Outside, they could hear men shouting to each other, trying to coordinate in the howling wind. There's a root cellar, Clara whispered. Through that trap door. Sam and Levi, get down there. Rest of you. We're going to make them think this place is empty. It was a tense half-hour as the garrison gang searched the area, their frustration growing as the storm battered them. Twice, someone tried the door, but finding it barred and seeing no light, they moved on. Finally, the sound of horses faded as they sought shelter elsewhere. When Clara finally relit the lamps and gave the all-clear, the 5 men looked at her with new respect. She had handled the situation with the cool head of someone accustomed to danger. They'll be back, Enoch said. When the storm clears, they'll search every structure in 50 miles. Then we'd best be ready. Clara replied, checking her ammunition. This storm's giving us time. Question is, what do we do with it? As the wind continued to howl outside, the 7 unlikely companions began to plan, bound together now by circumstance and the promise of violence to come. Clara found herself studying each man in turn, wondering what fate had brought them to her door and what price she would pay for letting them in. The storm raged on, sealing them in together, while somewhere in the darkness, their enemies waited for morning. Dawn came slowly, the storm having blown itself out during the night, leaving behind a transformed landscape where familiar landmarks once stood. New dunes had formed, and the air hung thick with settling dust. Clara stood outside her cabin, surveying the damage while the men emerged one by one, blinking in the harsh morning light. The devastation was complete. A dead steer lay half buried in sand 50 yards from the cabin, its brand still visible, Circle J, from a ranch 2 valleys over. Broken timber and twisted metal littered the ground, and Clara's carefully tended vegetable garden was gone, scoured clean as if it had never existed. The chicken coop had been reduced to kindling, though, miraculously, she could hear survivors clucking from their shelter in the hillside cave where she'd moved them. Lord Almighty. Sam breathed, his bandaged head making him look like a partially wrapped mummy. Never seen a storm do this much damage. Welcome to the high desert, Clara said dryly, already calculating what needed to be done. Help me check the horses. The stable carved into the hillside had protected the animals well enough, though they were skittish and wild-eyed. Clara spoke to them in low, calming tones as she checked each one for injuries. The men watched her work, noting how even the most fractious mounts settled under her touch. You've got the gift, Miguel observed, admiration clear in his voice. My grandmother, she had it too, said horses could sense a true heart. Horses sense a steady hand and a calm voice, Clara corrected, but she was pleased despite herself. Jed, you and Enoch start clearing the debris from the well. We'll need water before anything else. Miguel, help me with these horses. They need to be walked and watered. She was accustomed to working alone, to long days where her only company was her own thoughts and the occasional conversation with her animals. Having help, competent help, was strange, but not unwelcome. The men fell into the rhythm of work without complaint, and by midday, they had restored some order to the chaos. It was Levi who spotted the tracks. Riders, he called out from where he was repairing a section of corral fence. Coming from the north, maybe 6 hours old. Hard to tell with all this shifted sand. The group gathered to examine the signs. Clara knelt beside the prints. her experienced eye reading the story they told. 8 riders, maybe 9, moving slow, searching. They'll be back. We should leave. Jed said immediately, "We've brought you enough trouble." "Leave for where?" Clara stood, dusting off her hands. "The nearest town is 3 days' ride, and that's if you know the water holes. After this storm, half the landmarks are gone. You'd be riding blind right into their arms." "She's right," Enoch agreed reluctantly. "Garrison knows this territory. He's probably got men watching every trail out of here." Clara made a decision that surprised even her. "Then we make our stand here. This is good defensive ground, and I know it better than anyone." "You don't owe us that," Sam protested. "This isn't your fight." "Became my fight the moment armed men started circling my home," Clara replied firmly. "Besides, from what you've told me about this Garrison, he's not the type to leave witnesses. I let you boys ride out. He'll still come for me." They spent the afternoon preparing. Clara showed them the natural fortifications around her property, the rocks that provided cover, the hidden spring that could serve as a fallback position, the narrow canyon that looked like a trap but actually led to a box canyon where horses could be hidden. As they worked, she found herself observing these men who had crashed into her solitary life. Jed had a natural leadership that reminded her of her father, quiet but decisive, the kind of man others looked to in crisis. He organized their defenses with military precision, utilizing each man's strengths. Miguel worked with the horses, creating a picket line in a protected area where they wouldn't be easy targets. His hands were gentle but sure, and Clara noticed he talked to them constantly in a mix of Spanish and English, the same way she did when alone. Sam, despite his injury, proved invaluable with his educated mind. He sketched out a map of the area from Clara's descriptions, marking fields of fire and escape routes. "Mathematics and tactics aren't so different," he explained when Clara expressed surprise. "Both are about seeing patterns and predicting outcomes." Enoch took inventory of their weapons and ammunition with professional thoroughness. The broken-nosed former lawman had a dangerous competence about him that made Clara glad he was on their side. She watched him fashion improvised fortifications from wagon parts and feed sacks filled with sand. Young Levi worked with tireless energy, hauling supplies and digging defensive positions without complaint. There was something to prove in his eagerness, a need to show he belonged with these harder men. Clara recognized it. She'd felt the same need once, before she'd learned that the only person she needed to prove anything to was herself. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, they gathered in the cabin for a meal of jackrabbit stew and cornbread. The atmosphere was different from the night before, less desperate, more determined. They had a plan now, and ground to defend. "Tell me about this Garrison," Clara said, needing to understand their enemy. Jed's face darkened. Luke Garrison came up from Texas after the war with a gang of border ruffians. Started small, rustling, intimidation, but he's smart and mean, built himself quite an operation. Has judges and sheriffs in his pocket from here to the Rio Grande. We were protecting a drive for Don Alejandro Vega, Miguel added. Good man, trying to get his cattle to market to save his ranch. Garrison wanted a cut, half the profits, for protection. When Don Alejandro refused, they burned his hacienda. Sam finished quietly. His daughter was inside. She got out, but barely. Clara felt a cold anger settle in her chest. She'd met men like Garrison before, those who took what they wanted because they could, who saw strength as permission for cruelty. "So you stood against him," she said. "Got the herd through to Fort Sumner," Enoch confirmed. "Garrison lost face, lost money. Can't let that stand, not if he wants to keep his empire. And now he's hunting you. To the ends of the earth, most likely." Jed agreed. Man like that can't abide being beaten. As if summoned by the mention of his name, the sound of approaching horses carried on the evening air. Many horses moving with purpose. The men moved quickly to their positions. Clara took her place at a window with a clear field of fire, her father's Winchester ready. Through the gathering dusk, she could see riders approaching, 15, maybe 20, They'd gathered reinforcements. The lead rider stopped just outside rifle range, and even at that distance, Clara could feel the menace radiating from him. Luke Garrison was a big man on a black horse, his pale duster making him stand out against the darkening landscape. "Carson," his voice carried clearly in the still air. "I know you're in there. You and your friends have led me quite a chase." Jed didn't respond, following Clara's earlier advice about not confirming their presence. "I'm a reasonable man." Garrison continued, his tone conversational. "Send out the Mexican and we'll call the blood debt square. The rest of you can ride out. You have my word." Miguel cursed softly in Spanish from his position. "No," Garrison called. "Well, can't say I didn't try. Boys, burn them out." The first torch arced through the air, landing short of the cabin. Clara had cleared the ground around her home for just this reason, leaving nothing flammable within throwing distance. More torches followed, all falling harmlessly on bare earth or rock. "That's close enough," Clara called out, her voice carrying strong and clear. The riders stirred, not expecting a woman. "This is my land, and you're not welcome on it." A ripple of laughter ran through Garrison's men. Clara could see them more clearly now, hard-faced men who lived by the gun, the kind who would follow strength and brutality, respecting nothing else. "Well now," Garrison drawled. "And who might you be, miss?" "Someone who values her privacy." Clara replied. "Turn around and ride out. Last warning." "Brave words for someone harboring fugitives." Garrison shot back. "But I've got business with the men inside, and I mean to conclude it. Stand aside, woman, and you won't be hurt." Clara's response was to put a bullet into the ground 6 feet in front of Garrison's horse. The animal danced backward, and she had another round chambered before anyone could react. "Next one won't be a warning," she said calmly. The tension stretched tight as a bowstring. Then Garrison laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Boys, looks like we've got ourselves a siege. Make camp. We've got all the time in the world." As his men began to dismount and set up positions, Clara felt the weight of what was coming. She glanced at the men around her, these strangers who had become allies in the space of a day, and saw her own determination reflected in their faces. The war for her valley had begun. The siege settled into an uneasy rhythm over the following days. Garrison's men had made camp just beyond rifle range, their cooking fires taunting pinpricks of light in the darkness. They took turns watching, waiting for any sign of weakness, while inside the cabin, Clara and the 5 cowboys developed their own routines of survival. It was during the 3rd night, as they sat around the table cleaning weapons by lamplight, that the stories began to flow. Perhaps it was the shared danger, or the strange intimacy of their forced confinement. But walls that had stood for years began to crumble. "Never thought I'd die defending a schoolmarm's honor," Enoch said, breaking down his Colt with practiced ease. "Though I suppose there are worse ways to go." Sam looked up from the book Clara had lent him, one of her few precious possessions. "Who says we're dying? I've survived worse odds. Once had an entire classroom of 12-year-olds with the chicken pox. Now that was terrifying." The men chuckled, and even Clara felt her lips twitch. She was kneading bread dough for the next day, her powerful hands working the mixture with rhythmic efficiency. "How does a school teacher end up riding with cattle drivers anyway?" she asked. Sam's face grew thoughtful. "Came west for my lungs. Doctors said the dry air would help. Started teaching in Silver City, but..." He paused, considering his words. "There was a woman, married, unhappily. When her husband found out about our friendship, purely innocent, I assure you, well, let's say leaving town seemed prudent, and cattle driving seemed like a good alternative." Clara's tone was gently teasing. "Honest work." Sam shrugged. "And I found I was good with numbers, keeping track of the herd, managing supplies. Met Jed in a saloon in Amarillo. He was putting together a crew for Don Alejandro." Jed looked up from where he was stationed by the window. "Best decision I made. Sam saved us more than once with that brain of his. Figured out when buyers were trying to cheat us, kept the books so clean even the taxmen couldn't find fault." The conversation opened something in the group. Over the next few nights, As Garrison's men maintained their siege, more stories emerged. Miguel spoke of crossing the border as a boy, his father killed by bandits, his mother working herself to death in the fields of California before he ran away to find his fortune with horses. "First time I saw a Mustang running free," he said, his eyes distant with memory. "I knew that was what God put me here for, to understand them, work with them. My gift, my grandmother called it, but really it's just listening. Horses tell you everything if you know how to hear." Levi's story was simpler but no less poignant. The youngest of 8 children on a failing farm, watching his parents age before their time trying to scratch a living from unforgiving soil. "Drought took everything," he said quietly. "Pa just sat in his chair one day and didn't get up again. Ma sold what was left, sent us all to find our own way. Haven't been back. Don't know if I could face her empty-handed." It was Enoch who surprised them most. The scarred, dangerous man spoke haltingly of a wife and daughter in Colorado, of a badge worn with pride until the day he arrested the wrong man, the territorial governor's cousin, for murder. Had evidence clear as day. His gravelly voice was barely above a whisper. "Blood on his hands. Literally. But money talks louder than justice. They fired me, threatened my family, sent us running. Sarah took little Mary to her sister in Chicago. Better they think I'm dead than bring trouble to their door." Clara found herself moved by these confessions, these glimpses into the hearts of men who projected such hardness to the world. In return, she found herself sharing pieces of her own story she'd never spoken aloud. The loneliness of always being different, the pain of rejection, the fierce independence born of necessity. "Built this place board by board," she said one evening, her hands busy patching a bullet hole from the day's skirmish. "Every nail driven was a choice to stop running, to claim my own ground, even if I had to stand on it alone." "Not alone now," Jed said quietly, and something in his steady blue gaze made Clara's heart skip unexpectedly. As the days passed, she noticed things about each man that went beyond their stories. The way Miguel left small offerings of food for the field mice, claiming it was to keep them out of the stores, but smiling when he thought no one was looking. How Sam read aloud in the evenings, his educated voice bringing life to the works of Shakespeare and Dickens, transporting them all briefly beyond their besieged walls. Enoch showed a surprising gentleness when he helped Clara tend the chickens that had survived the storm, handling the birds with careful hands despite his intimidating appearance. And Levi, eager and earnest, soaked up every skill the others taught him, from Jed's tactical knowledge to Clara's wilderness craft. Jed himself revealed layers of complexity, the natural leader who never demanded obedience but earned it through competence and care. She caught him watching her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, something unreadable in those pale eyes that made her oddly self-conscious about her appearance for the first time in years. One evening, as Clara returned from checking the hidden spring, she found Miguel fashioning something from leather and silver. He looked up, almost shy, as she approached. "My grandmother's," he explained, holding up an intricately carved silver concho. "Carried it since I was 10. Thought it might look nice on that bridle you're working on. For the bay mare." Clara was touched by the gesture. "That's precious to you. I couldn't—" "Please," Miguel interrupted. "You've given us shelter, fought beside us. It would honor me." Similar small gestures followed. Sam offered to teach her to read and write better, having noticed her careful but basic script. "Not that you need improving," he hastened to add, "but knowledge is never wasted." Enoch repaired her tools with meticulous care, reinforcing handles and sharpening blades until they were better than new. Levi split enough wood to last months, attacking the task with youthful enthusiasm. But it was Jed's gift that affected her most. She found him one morning carving something from a piece of juniper, his hands sure and patient. "My father taught me," he said when she asked. "Long winter nights in Montana. Nothing to do but whittle and think." Days later, he presented her with the finished piece, a perfect miniature of her cabin, complete with tiny details like the reinforced shutters and the rain barrel. "So you can remember," he said simply. That you didn't stand alone when it counted. Clara held the carving carefully, her throat tight with unexpected emotion. Why? She asked. Why do all this for someone you barely know? Jed met her eyes directly. Because you didn't have to take us in. Because you stood with us when you could have turned us out. Because... He paused, seeming to wrestle with words. Because in all my years drifting, I've never met anyone like you. Clara, not just your size, your spirit. You carved out a place for yourself in this hard land. On your own terms. That's something worth defending. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility, before the crack of a distant rifle brought them back to reality. Garrison was growing impatient, his probing attacks more frequent. That night, as they prepared for what felt like an inevitable final assault, Clara was surprised to find she wasn't afraid, looking around at these 5 men who had started as strangers and become something more. She realized that for the first time in her adult life, she didn't feel alone. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said, breaking the contemplative silence, I want you all to know. She stopped, searching for words adequate to the feeling. This week has been more living than I've done in years. Don't talk like that, Levi said fiercely. We're going to make it, all of us. But they all knew the mathematics. Garrison had 20 men, maybe more. They had defensive position and determination, but ammunition was running low, and Garrison could afford to wait them out. If things go bad, Enoch said quietly, someone should try for Fort Sumner. Cavalry might still listen to a former lawman's word. I'll go, Sam volunteered. I'm the least use in a fight. You're not going anywhere with that head wound, Clara said firmly. If anyone goes, it should be... No one's running. Jed interrupted. We stand together or not at all. As if in response to his words. Shouts erupted from Garrison's camp. Through the window, they could see increased activity, men checking weapons and saddling horses. Looks like tomorrow's the day, Enoch observed grimly. They spent the remaining hours of darkness preparing, each lost in their own thoughts. Clara found herself wondering if she'd made the right choice, bringing violence to her peaceful valley. But looking at the determined faces around her, she knew she wouldn't change it. Whatever the cost, she had chosen connection over isolation, and that was worth any price. As dawn approached, Jed appeared at her shoulder where she stood watch. Clara, he said softly, there's something I need to say. In case... She put a finger to his lips, surprising them both with the intimate gesture. After, she said firmly. Tell me after we win. He smiled then, the expression transforming his weathered face. Yes, ma'am, after. The first rays of sunlight were just touching the peaks when Garrison's men began their advance. Clara checked her rifle one last time and took her position. Whatever came next, she would meet it with courage, surrounded by the most unlikely family she never knew she needed. The battle for her home was about to begin. The attack came with the dawn. Garrison's men advancing in 3 groups, using what cover the terrain provided. Clara had positioned herself at the east window, her rifle steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The first shots shattered the morning stillness, splinters of wood exploding from the window frame as bullets sought their marks. Hold your fire, Jed commanded. Wait until they're in range. Make every shot count. Clara drew a bead on a rider attempting to flank their position, her father's lessons echoing in her mind. Squeeze, don't jerk, breathe out, hold, fire. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and the rider tumbled from his saddle. No satisfaction in it, just grim necessity. The cabin became a cauldron of sound, gunfire, shouting, the whistle of bullets through air. Enoch worked his rifle with mechanical precision from the north window, each shot deliberate and deadly. Miguel had taken position in the loft, picking off anyone who tried to approach from the blind spot near the stable. For 20 minutes that felt like hours, they held their ground. Then Clara heard Levi cry out from his position. She turned to see him clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. I'm all right, he gasped, but his face was pale as parchment. "Sam, take his position." Jed ordered. "Clara, can you—" But Clara was already moving, her size allowing her to cross the cabin in 3 strides. She pressed Levi down, examining the wound with quick efficiency. The bullet had passed through the meat of his shoulder, painful and bloody, but not fatal if kept clean. "You'll live," she told him, packing the wound with clean cloth. "But you're done fighting for now." "I can still shoot," Levi protested, trying to rise. "With your left hand." Clara pushed him back down, gentler than her size might suggest. "Rest, that's an order." She returned to her position to find the battle had intensified. Garrison's men had found better cover and were pouring fire into the cabin. Every window was spider-webbed with cracks, and daylight showed through dozens of bullet holes in the walls. Then she saw him, Garrison himself, directing his men from behind a cluster of rocks. The range was long, almost impossible, but Clara had made harder shots bringing down elk in the high country. She adjusted for wind and distance, settling into that calm space where heartbeat and breath synchronized. The shot took Garrison's hat off, sending him diving for deeper cover. His men faltered, seeing their leader rattled, and the attack momentarily stalled. "Good shooting," Enoch grunted, then cursed as a bullet creased his arm. "These boys are getting too close." He was right. Some of Garrison's men had worked their way to within 30 yards, using every dip and rise in the ground. If they got much closer, they could rush the cabin. "We need to fall back to the secondary position," Jed decided. The spring, they discussed this possibility, but leaving the cabin felt like defeat. Still, Clara trusted Jed's tactical instincts. "Levi can't make that run," she said. "I'll carry him," Enoch volunteered, binding his arm wound with practiced movements. Like hell, Levi struggled upright. "I can walk." "Miguel, lay down covering fire." Jed instructed. "Sam, you and Clara go first. Get to the rocks and cover our retreat." Clara grabbed her ammunition and a bag of supplies they'd prepared for this contingency. Sam was beside her, his face set with determination despite the fear she could see in his eyes. "On 3, Jed counted. 1, 2. They burst from the back door as Miguel's rifle sang its rapid song. Clara had never run so hard in her life, her long legs eating up ground as bullets whined past like angry hornets. She heard Sam gasp beside her, but he kept running. And then they were diving behind the massive boulder that marked the entrance to the spring's hollow. Clara immediately began firing back at their pursuers, giving the others time to make their escape. She saw Enoch half dragging, half carrying Levi, Jed and Miguel providing covering fire as they retreated. For a moment, it looked like they would all make it. Then Miguel stumbled. Clara saw the red bloom spreading across his shirt as he went down. Without thinking, she was moving, leaving the safety of cover to reach him. Bullets sparked off rocks inches from her head as she scooped Miguel up like a child, his weight nothing to her adrenaline-fueled strength. "Stupid woman," Miguel gasped, his face twisted with pain. "Should have left me." "Shut up," Clara growled, running harder as Garrison's men concentrated their fire on her. She could hear Jed and the others laying down desperate covering fire, trying to protect her exposed retreat. She made it to the rocks as her legs finally betrayed her, exhaustion and fear catching up all at once. She stumbled, going down hard with Miguel still in her arms, feeling something hot tear across her ribs as she fell. Then strong hands were pulling both of them to safety. Jed and Enoch dragged them behind the rocks as Sam continued to fire at their pursuers. Clara gasped for breath, her side burning, but her first concern was for Miguel. The wound was bad. Lower chest, bleeding freely despite the pressure Sam applied with torn strips of his shirt. Miguel's breathing was labored, each breath bringing a pink froth to his lips. "Lungs hit," Enoch said grimly, his experience with violence telling the tale. "The cavalry," Clara gasped out. "Someone needs to go for help now." "I'll go," Sam said immediately. "I'm the freshest, and you're needed here." Jed cut him off. Enoch? The former lawman nodded. My word might still carry weight. Can you hold for 2 days? Clara looked at their defensive position. The spring hollow was good ground. Water, shelter, clear fields of fire, but they were down to 4 fighters, with 2 wounded. We'll hold, she said with more confidence than she felt. Enoch prepared to leave under cover of darkness, but Garrison had other ideas. As the sun climbed higher, the outlaws attempted another assault. This time they were more cautious, more coordinated, having learned respect for their quarry's marksmanship. The fighting was fierce but brief. The defensive position proved its worth, and Garrison's men fell back after losing 2 more of their number. But the victory came at a cost. Their ammunition was running dangerously low. As afternoon wore on, Miguel's condition worsened. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes speaking in Spanish to people who weren't there. Clara sat with him during a lull, pressing water to his lips and trying to keep him comfortable. Should have been a priest, Miguel mumbled, his eyes focusing briefly on her face. Mama wanted, but the horses called louder than God. He tried to smile. Maybe he's calling now, eh? Don't talk like that, Clara said fiercely. You're going to be fine. Help is coming. Miguel's hand found hers, his grip surprisingly strong. Take the concho, he whispered. For your mare, promise. You'll put it on her yourself. Clara insisted, but Miguel's eyes were already closing. As sunset approached, Garrison tried a new tactic. Carson! His voice carried across the open ground. Your Mexican friend needs a doctor. Send him out. I'll see he gets to town. You have my word. Your word isn't worth spit. Jed called back. Then he dies, Garrison replied coldly. How many more, Carson? How many friends will you sacrifice for your pride? Clara felt rage build in her chest. She started to rise, but Jed caught her arm. Don't let him bait you, he warned. That's what he wants. But Clara was beyond caring. She stood to her full height, making herself a target. Luke Garrison! Her voice rang out like a bell. You want to talk about sacrifice? Come out here and face me. Just you and me. Winner takes all. There was silence from the outlaw camp, then laughter. You sending your woman to fight for you now? Carson? I'm nobody's woman, Clara roared. I'm Clara McKinnon, and this is my land you're bloodying. You got the stones to face me, or are you only brave when you've got 20 guns backing you? Clara, no, Sam protested, but she shook him off. Interesting proposition, Garrison called out. But I don't fight women. Then you're a coward as well as a thief. Clara shot back. No wonder you need an army to chase down 5 honest men. The insult hit home. She could see Garrison's men stirring, looking at their leader, waiting for his response. In the West, a challenge like this couldn't go unanswered, not if he wanted to keep their respect. All right, Miss McKinnon. Garrison's voice was tight with anger. You want to play with the men? Come on out. When I'm done with you, maybe I'll let your friends bury what's left. Clara checked her sidearm and started forward. But Jed caught her arm. This is insane. You can't... Watch me, Clara said, meeting his eyes. Trust me, Jed, please. Something in her gaze must have convinced him, because he released her, though every line of his body spoke of protest. Clara walked out into the open ground between the 2 positions, her spine straight, her stride confident. Garrison emerged from his cover, and Clara got her first good look at the man who had caused so much pain. He was big, though still nearly a foot shorter than her, with the kind of cruel, handsome features that weak people mistook for strength. His hand hovered near his pistol, confidence radiating from every movement. They met in the middle, 20 feet apart, up close. Clara could see the moment Garrison truly registered her size, the slight widening of his eyes as he had to tilt his head back to meet her gaze. Last chance to apologize and ride out, Clara offered, her voice carrying clearly to both camps. Garrison's hand moved for his gun, fast as a striking snake. Clara had spent 13 years alone in the wilderness, 13 years hunting game that could kill her if she missed. 13 years where a moment's hesitation meant starvation. She wasn't fast like a gunslinger. She was fast like a predator. Her draw was economical, efficient, and deadly accurate. The shot took Garrison's center mass, spinning him around before he hit the ground. His gun had barely cleared leather. For a moment, nobody moved. Then one of Garrison's men raised his rifle, and Clara dove for cover as the clearing erupted in gunfire once more. But something had changed. Without Garrison's leadership, his men's hearts weren't in it. They began to fall back, then broke entirely, racing for their horses. Clara made it back to the defensive position as the outlaws fled, their wounded leader slung over a saddle. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline aftermath making her legs weak. "That was the damnedest thing I ever saw," Enoch said with something like awe. "Remind me never to make you angry." But there was no time for celebration. Miguel had taken a turn for the worse while she was gone, his breathing shallow and labored. They'd won the battle, but the cost was becoming clear as darkness fell over the valley. Clara kept vigil beside the wounded man, pressing his grandmother's concho into his palm and praying to whatever might be listening that help would come in time. The moon hung like a silver dollar in the desert sky, casting long shadows across the spring hollow where they'd made their stand. Clara had finally convinced Jed to rest while she kept watch, though she knew he was only pretending to sleep. The events of the day weighed heavy on them all, but the night brought no peace, only the soft, labored breathing of Miguel and the distant cry of coyotes. Clara had changed the dressing on her ribs. Finding the bullet had carved a shallow furrow across her side. Nothing serious, though it burned like fire. Levi dozed fitfully, his shoulder bound tight, while Sam maintained his vigil over Miguel, reading softly from his battered copy of Don Quixote, a fitting choice for men tilting at their own windmills. It was perhaps 2 hours past midnight when Miguel stirred, his eyes focusing with unusual clarity. "Clara," he whispered, and she was beside him instantly. "Save your strength," she said gently, but he shook his head. "No time for that." His voice was stronger than it had been all day, the false strength that sometimes comes before the end. "Need to tell you something, all of you." The others gathered close, even Jed abandoning his pretense of sleep. In the moonlight, Miguel's face seemed younger, the pain lines smoothed away. "My grandmother," he began, each word careful and deliberate. "She used to say that home isn't a place, it's the people who would bleed for you, and who you'd bleed for in return." He looked at each of them in turn. "Never understood that. Always thought home was the rancho we lost, the valley where I learned to ride, but now—" His hand found Clara's, his grip weak but insistent. "You gave me home again, Senora. All of you did. A man couldn't ask for better company at the end." "Don't talk like that," Levi said roughly, tears streaming unashamed down his young face. "Help's coming. You'll see." Miguel smiled, that gentle expression Clara had seen when he worked with the horses. Maybe so, but if not— He pressed the silver concho into Clara's palm again. "For the bay mare, so something of my family's legacy runs free in this place." He closed his eyes, and for a moment they thought he was gone. Then he spoke again, so soft they had to lean close to hear. "Tell my story sometime, eh? Tell them Miguel Santos died free, among friends." They kept vigil through the remaining hours of darkness, taking turns talking to Miguel, sharing stories and memories as if their words could anchor him to life. Clara found herself speaking of things she'd never told anyone, her dreams of maybe raising horses properly someday, of building something more than just a hiding place in the desert. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, Miguel's breathing grew shallower. He roused once more, looking directly at Clara with perfect lucidity. "Gracias," he whispered, "for letting us in, for standing with us. You are magnificent." Then, as the first ray of sunlight touched the rocks above them, Miguel Santos breathed his last, a peaceful expression on his face, as if he'd just spotted the perfect horse on a distant horizon. They were still sitting in stunned silence when the sound of many hoofbeats reached them. Clara grabbed her rifle, ready for another attack, but Jed put a hand on her arm. "That's cavalry," he said, and sure enough, a troop of blue-coated soldiers appeared, led by Enoch and a young lieutenant. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. The soldiers had a doctor with them who tended their wounds with professional efficiency. The lieutenant took their statements, his face growing grimmer with each detail of Garrison's attacks. "We picked up what was left of his gang headed for Mexico. He informed them Garrison himself might live, though he'll never draw a gun again. You put that bullet right where it counted. Miss McKinnon." Clara felt no satisfaction at the news, only a bone-deep weariness. They buried Miguel that afternoon, choosing a spot on a rise overlooking the valley where the horses ran. Each of them spoke, sharing memories of the man who had touched their lives so briefly but so deeply. As the soldiers prepared to leave, the lieutenant approached Clara. "Miss McKinnon, what you all did here, well, there might be some reward money for stopping Garrison's gang, and I'm sure Don Alejandro would want to know about Miguel's sacrifice." Clara nodded absently, her mind elsewhere. The soldiers departed, leaving the survivors to face a new reality. The danger had passed, but now came the harder part, deciding what came next. That evening, they sat around Clara's table one last time. The cabin bore the scars of battle, bullet holes letting in streams of fading light, windows boarded where glass had shattered, but it still stood, as did they. "I should head to Fort Sumner," Sam said finally. "See about that teaching position. This adventure has satisfied my appetite for gunplay for a lifetime." "Good school there," Jed agreed. "They'd be lucky to have you." "What about you?" Clara asked Enoch. The former lawman was quiet for a long moment. "Might be time to stop running. Head to Chicago. See if my family will have me back. Man can't live in the past forever." "Levi?" The young man straightened, his wounded shoulder making him wince. "Think I'll stay in the territory. Maybe hire on with the outfit that's hiring. Do things proper this time." He looked at Jed. "If you're putting together another crew." "Might be," Jed allowed. "Though I'm thinking of maybe finding a place to light for a while. Getting too old for the trail." An awkward silence fell. They all knew what hadn't been said, what hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Clara stood, busying herself with clearing the table, when Jed spoke again. "Could use some help here, fixing up the place after all this damage." Clara's hands stilled on the dishes. "That's so? If you'd have me, us, for a while." Jed's voice was carefully neutral, but Clara could hear the question underneath. She turned to face them all, these men who had crashed into her solitary life and changed it forever. "This is my place," she said firmly. "Built it with my own hands, my own sweat. I won't give that up for anyone." The men's faces fell, but Clara wasn't finished. "But maybe it doesn't always have to be just my place. Maybe a person can be strong and still want company. Maybe being alone isn't the same as being free." Hope flickered in Jed's eyes. "What are you saying?" Clara took a deep breath, feeling like she was stepping off a cliff. "I'm saying there's work enough here for willing hands. The storm wrecked my garden, and I've been thinking about expanding the horse operation. Could use help building proper corrals, maybe a bigger barn." She met each of their eyes in turn. "You'd be welcome to stay as long as you like. Partners, not hired hands. Build your own cabins if you've a mind to make it permanent." "And if someone was thinking of something more permanent than just a cabin?" Jed asked quietly. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she held his gaze. "Then we'd have to see, wouldn't we? I'm not the marrying kind. Jed Carson. Don't know if I ever will be, but I'm willing to find out, if you're patient enough to let me do it in my own time." Jed smiled then, that rare, transformative expression that made him look years younger. "I've waited this long to find someone like you. Clara, I can wait a bit longer." It was then that Levi, young and impulsive, suddenly dropped to one knee beside Clara's chair. His face was red as a sunset, but his voice was determined. "Miss Clara, I know I'm just a kid to you, and I know I've got nothing to offer but a strong back and willing hands. But would you, that is—" He grabbed her hand, gentle despite his nervousness. "Please marry me. I'd be good to you, I swear it." The cabin went silent as a tomb. Sam's mouth hung open. Enoch raised an eyebrow. Jed's face was unreadable. Clara looked down at the earnest young man, his heart in his eyes, his wounded shoulder making him list slightly to one side. She felt a wave of affection for him. Brave, foolish boy, trying so hard to be a man. But what she felt wasn't love. Not the kind he was offering. As gently as she could. She squeezed his hand and smiled. "Levi, you're going to make some woman very happy someday. But that woman isn't me." She helped him to his feet, her voice kind but firm. "You're meant for someone who'll match your fire, your youth, your dreams of adventure. Not an old hermit who just wants to raise horses in peace." Levi's face crumpled for a moment before he mustered a weak smile. "Had to try," he said, voice rough. "Man'd be a fool not to try." "Besides," Clara added with a slight smile, looking at her own hands, then at his smaller ones. "You're too small for me." The tension broke as Sam let out a snort of laughter, and even Levi managed a genuine grin. "Suppose I am at that," he admitted, "in more ways than one." As the evening wore on, they made their plans. Enoch would leave in the morning for Chicago and his family. Sam would take the teaching position, though he promised to visit when school wasn't in session. Levi would stay to help with repairs before seeking his fortune. And Jed would stay as long as Clara would have him. Later, as the others bedded down for their last night together, Clara stepped outside. The moon was setting now, casting new shadows across her valley. But it didn't look empty anymore. Even scarred by battle, even touched by loss, it looked like possibility. Jed joined her, standing close but not touching. "No regrets?" he asked. "None," Clara said firmly. Miguel was right. Home isn't a place, it's people. She looked at him sideways. "Though I'm warning you now, Carson, I don't cook for anyone. I don't take orders, and I sure as hell don't need protecting." "Wouldn't dream of it," Jed said solemnly, though his eyes danced with humor. "Though I make a fair stew. I follow suggestions pretty well, and seems to me you do just fine protecting yourself." Clara smiled, feeling something ease in her chest that had been tight for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Then we might just work out after all. As they stood together watching the stars wheel overhead, Clara thought about the strange turns life could take. A week ago, she'd been alone and content with it. Now she was neither alone nor content with solitude. And that was perhaps the greatest change of all. The desert wind whispered through the rocks, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. And somewhere in that vast darkness, a bay mare ran free, a silver concho gleaming on her bridle, carrying Miguel's legacy across the wild land he'd loved. The morning of departure dawned clear and bright, as if the desert itself had washed its face for the occasion. Clara stood at her door, watching Enoch secure his saddlebags with methodical care. The former lawman had shaved and cleaned up, looking more respectable than she'd ever seen him, though the broken nose and scarred hands would always tell his true story. "Strange how a week can change everything," Enoch said, testing the cinch on his saddle. "Came here running from my past, leaving now to face it." "Takes courage," Clara observed. "More than facing down outlaws." Enoch's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. "You'd know about courage. Never seen anyone stand taller than you did against Garrison. And I'm not talking about height." He swung into the saddle with surprising grace for such a large man, then reached into his vest pocket. "Almost forgot. This is yours." He handed down a folded paper. Clara opened it to find a deed transfer. "Enoch, what?" "Little piece of land I bought years ago. Planning to build on when I retired. Northeast corner of your valley. Butts up against your property line. Never going to use it now." He adjusted his hat against the morning sun. "Figured you might want to expand that horse operation you mentioned." "I can't accept this," Clara protested, but Enoch was already turning his horse. "Sure you can. Consider it payment for reminding an old lawman what justice looks like." He touched his hat brim. You ever get to Chicago? Look up the Thornton boarding house on Madison Street. My Sarah runs it. Tell her Enoch Price finally found his way home. He rode off without looking back. A man heading toward redemption or heartbreak, possibly both. Clara watched until he disappeared over the ridge, the deed paper feeling heavy in her hands. Sam left next, the morning stage to Fort Sumner arriving in a cloud of dust and rattling wheels. He'd cleaned his coat and combed his hair, looking every inch the schoolteacher again except for the healing cuts on his face and the new steadiness in his eyes. I've left you something too, he told Clara as they waited for his trunk to be loaded. Box of books in the cabin. Figured you might want to practice those letters we worked on. Sam Winters, you trying to civilize me? Clara asked with mock severity. Wouldn't dream of it, Sam laughed. But even wild things deserve stories. His expression grew serious. Thank you, Clara, for the shelter. Yes, but more for showing me that there's still nobility in this world. I'd grown cynical. I think you cured me of that. You stood with us when it counted. Clara said simply, That's nobility enough for anyone. The stage driver called for boarding. Sam hesitated, then stood on his toes to kiss Clara's cheek, barely reaching even so. Be happy, he whispered. You've earned it. As the stage pulled away, Levi emerged from the stable where he'd been tending the horses one last time. His shoulder was still bound, but he moved with new confidence, as if the boy who'd arrived a week ago had been left somewhere on the battlefield. Found a outfit hiring down in Lincoln, he announced. Straight work, good wages. Figure I'll learn the business proper. Maybe have my own spread someday. You'll do well, Clara said, meaning it. You've got good instincts and a willing heart. Just remember, I know, Levi grinned. Think before I act. Measure twice, cut once. And never draw unless I mean to shoot. You and Jed must have told me 50 times. His horse was saddled and ready, but Levi lingered, scuffing the dirt with his boot. About last night. Nothing to apologize for. Clara cut him off. Takes courage to speak your heart. Just make sure the next time you do it, it's to someone who can return the feeling. Yes, ma'am. Levi swung into his saddle, then looked down at her with surprising maturity. He's a good man. Jed, best I've ridden with. Don't make him wait too long. Miss Clara, life's shorter than we think. Before she could respond, he spurred his horse and was gone, whooping like the young man he was, racing toward his future with all the optimism of youth. The sun climbed higher, and Clara found herself alone with Jed for the first time since that first desperate night. They worked in companionable silence, clearing battle damage and making lists of needed repairs. It felt natural, moving around each other with the easy rhythm of long partnership despite having known each other barely a week. Going to be strange, Jed finally said, taking a break from boarding up bullet holes. Just the two of us after all that chaos. Having second thoughts, Clara kept her tone light, but her hands stilled on the board she was cutting. No? Jed's answer was immediate and certain. Been drifting for 20 years. Clara worked cattle from Texas to Montana. Hired my gun out when times were lean. Never stayed anywhere longer than a season. Always felt like I was looking for something, but never knew what. He met her eyes. Until I saw you put down Luke Garrison like he was nothing. Then turn around and gentle Miguel's passing like your hands were made for healing instead of fighting. Knew right then I'd found what I didn't know I was searching for. Clara felt heat rise in her face and turned away, unused to such direct words. Pretty speech, cowboy. You practice that? Every word true. Jed moved closer but still maintained a respectful distance. I meant what I said last night. I'll wait as long as you need. Court you proper, if you'll let me. Build my own cabin over on that land Enoch gave you. Close enough to help but far enough to give you space. Whatever you need. And if what I need changes? Clara asked softly. If I wake up one day and realize I want my solitude back, then I'll pack up and ride out. Jed said simply, no anger, no recriminations. Man doesn't cage something wild and beautiful and expect it to thank him for the bars. Clara turned to face him fully then, This man who understood what so many others hadn't. "I'm not beautiful," she said, the old pain creeping into her voice. "I'm too big, too rough, too—" "Stop." Jed's voice was firm. "You're exactly who you're meant to be. Strong enough to survive alone in this hard land, gentle enough to nurse wounded men, brave enough to face down killers. If that's not beautiful, then the word has no meaning." For a long moment, they stood there, the morning sun casting their shadows across the scarred earth. Then Clara did something that surprised them both. She reached out and took his hand. Her palm dwarfed his, but their calluses matched, working hands that knew labor and hardship. "All right, Jed Carson," she said. "We'll try it your way. But I'm warning you now. I wake up early. I get cranky when it rains, and I talk to the horses more than most folks would consider normal. I snore. I drink my coffee black enough to float a horseshoe, and I've been known to quote Shakespeare when I'm drunk." Jed countered, "Seems we're evenly matched in peculiarities." Clara laughed, a real laugh that came from deep in her belly. "Lord help us both." They spent the rest of the day working side by side, and Clara found herself stealing glances at this man who'd chosen to stay. Not young. The sun had carved deep lines around his eyes and silver touched his temples. Not handsome in the conventional sense. His face was too weathered. His nose had been broken at least once, but there was strength in the set of his shoulders, kindness in the way he handled the animals, and intelligence in those pale eyes that saw so much. As evening approached, they sat on the porch Clara had built, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson. The bay mare had appeared, as she often did at dusk, Miguel's silver concho catching the light as she grazed peacefully. "Going to build something good here," Jed said quietly. "Horse ranch like you talked about. Maybe run some cattle on that new parcel. Nothing big, nothing that would change what you've made, just more." "More," Clara repeated, tasting the word. For so long, she'd wanted less contact, less pain, less risk. Now here was this man offering more, and strangest of all, she wanted it. "I need to tell you something," she said suddenly, "about why I really left Missouri. You don't owe me your past, Clara. No, but I want you to know." She took a breath, gathering courage. "There was a man, Thomas. I thought, well, I was young and foolish and thought someone could love me despite everything. When his mother made her feelings clear, when the whole town turned against me, I didn't just leave. I burned bridges, said things, did things I'm not proud of, hurt people who were just scared and small-minded, not evil." Jed was quiet for a moment. "We all got things we'd do different with hindsight. Doesn't change who you are now." "I'm telling you because I want to do this different." Clara continued, "I don't want to run anymore, don't want to hide. If we're building something here, I want it built on truth." "Then here's mine." Jed said, "I've killed men, not just Garrison's boys, but others over the years. Most deserved it. Some were just on the wrong side of a fight. I drink too much sometimes, trying to forget their faces. I've broken promises, failed friends, chosen the easy road when I should have stood firm." He looked at her directly. "But I promise you this. Clara McKinnon, I will never lie to you, never raise a hand to you, and never try to make you small to make myself feel bigger." Clara squeezed his hand, sealing the promise. "Then we understand each other." As full dark settled over the valley, they made their simple meal and talked of practical things, materials needed for building, bloodlines for breeding stock, the prosaic details of the life they were choosing to build together. But underneath the practical talk ran a current of something deeper, a recognition between two souls who had wandered long and far before finding a place to stand. Later, as Jed prepared to bed down in the stable, "Just until I get that cabin built," he turned back at the door. "Clara, that thing young Levi said about being too small, he was wrong. You know, it's not that we're too small for you. It's that you're exactly the right size for your life. The rest of us just need to learn to measure up." After he left, Clara stood in her doorway, looking out at her valley. Their valley now, she supposed. The stars were brilliant overhead, and somewhere in the darkness a coyote called to its mate. The sound didn't seem lonely anymore. Instead, it sounded like what it was. One voice calling to another across the darkness. Proof that even in the vast desert, no one had to be alone. She thought of Miguel, sleeping peacefully on his hillside, of Enoch heading toward his family, Sam toward his new students, Levi toward his dreams. Lives that had intersected with hers briefly but meaningfully, leaving her changed in ways she was only beginning to understand. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, cabins to build, horses to train, a relationship to navigate with all its uncertain terrain. But tonight, Clara McKinnon stood in the doorway of the home she'd built with her own hands, no longer hiding from the world but ready to meet it on her own terms. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, that felt like enough. More than enough. It felt like everything. 6 months passed like seasons in the desert, slowly at first. Then, all at once, Clara stood on the rise overlooking her expanded valley, watching the morning sun paint the new buildings gold. Jed's cabin sat sturdy and complete on Enoch's old plot, close enough that she could see him drinking coffee on his porch, far enough that they both had their breathing room. Between their homes, new corrals held a dozen horses, including the bay mare who now served as the foundation for their modest breeding program. The changes weren't just physical. Clara moved differently now, still strong and purposeful, but without the constant vigilance that had marked her solitary years. She'd even let her hair down more often, no longer concerned about being ready to fight or flee at a moment's notice. A dust cloud on the eastern road caught her attention. As it drew closer, she recognized the distinctive gait of Sam's rented horse. He'd written that he was coming for a visit during school break, but seeing him actually arrive sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "Clara," Sam called out as he dismounted, looking healthier than she'd ever seen him. "Lord above, look at this place. You've built a proper ranch." She came down to meet him, accepting his enthusiastic embrace. "Sam Winters, you've put on weight. Teaching must agree with you." 3 meals a day and no one shooting at me, Sam laughed. "Amazing what that does for a man's health. Where's Jed?" "Coming now," Clara said, watching her partner approach from the breaking corral where he'd been working with a young stallion. The two men shook hands warmly, and soon they were settled around Clara's table like old times, coffee strong and conversation flowing. "Got a letter from Enoch last month," Sam revealed, pulling out a worn envelope. "He made it to Chicago. His wife took him back, though he says she made him sleep in the barn for the first month. His daughter's married now, has a baby of her own. He's working as a security guard at a bank. Says it's nice upholding the law again without getting shot at." "Good for him," Jed said sincerely. "Man deserves some peace after what he's been through." "And young Levi?" Clara asked. "Saw him in Fort Sumner. He's segundo on the Triple Bar Ranch now. Can you believe it? 26 years old and second in command of one of the biggest spreads in the territory. Sends his regards. By the way, says to tell you he's courting the schoolmaster's daughter, someone exactly his size." Sam grinned. His words, not mine. They spent the afternoon touring the improvements, Sam marveling at everything from the new well to the expanded stable. As they stood by Miguel's grave, now marked with a proper headstone that Jed had carved, Sam pulled out a worn letter. "From Don Alejandro," he explained. "When he heard about Miguel's sacrifice, he sent this." Inside was a bank draft. "For Miguel's family," he said, "but I tracked them down. He was the last. Don Alejandro insisted it go to you, then said Miguel would want his friends to prosper." Clara stared at the amount. Enough to buy proper breeding stock, maybe even hire help for the busiest seasons. "I can't." "You can and you will," Sam interrupted firmly. "Miguel died defending your home. Honor that by building something worthy of his sacrifice." That evening, as they sat watching the sunset, conversation turned philosophical as it often did when Sam was around. "Do you ever think about how unlikely it all was?" Sam mused. 5 strangers and 1 woman, thrown together by a sandstorm. By all rights, we should have died that week. Instead, He gestured at the thriving ranch around them. Maybe it wasn't chance. Jed suggested. Maybe some things are meant to be. Clara, who had never been one for fate or mysticism, found herself nodding. Or maybe we just made our own luck, chose to trust instead of suspect, chose to stand together instead of apart. Speaking of choosing, Sam said with studied casualness, when are you two going to make it official? The whole territory's talking about the lady giant and her devoted cowboy. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. Sam Winters, you gossip worse than a saloon girl. It's a valid question, Sam protested, grinning. Jed's been courting you proper for 6 months. Man's built a cabin, helps run your ranch, looks at you like you hung the moon. What more does he need to do? Clara glanced at Jed, who was studiously examining his coffee cup. They danced around this subject for weeks now, neither quite ready to take that final step. Maybe, she said slowly, it's not about what he needs to do. Maybe it's about me being ready to believe it's real, that it won't disappear like smoke if I reach for it. Jed looked up then, meeting her eyes. Been real since the day you stood between us and Garrison's guns, he said quietly. Getting realer every day. Sam excused himself shortly after, claiming exhaustion from travel, but really, Clara suspected, giving them privacy. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, she and Jed sat in companionable silence. He's not wrong, you know, Jed finally said, about making things official. Not pushing, just observing. Clara considered this man who had become so essential to her life, who worked beside her without complaint, who respected her independence while offering partnership, who saw her size as strength rather than aberration. Next time we're in town, she said finally, we'll see the justice of the peace. Jed's face lit up like sunrise. You mean that? Never say things I don't mean. Clara reached for his hand. But I want to do this our way. No fuss, no fancy ceremony, just us making a promise, legal and binding. Wouldn't have it any other way. Jed agreed, lifting her hand to kiss it gently. 2 weeks later, they stood before Judge Artemis Coleman in his dusty office, Sam serving as witness alongside the judge's clerk. Clara wore her best shirt and cleanest trousers, having refused Sam's offer to buy her a dress. Jed had trimmed his beard and dug out a string tie from somewhere. Do you, Clara McKinnon, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Judge Coleman intoned, barely hiding his fascination with the height difference between bride and groom. I do, Clara said firmly. And do you, Jedediah Carson, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? With my whole heart, Jed replied, ignoring the script. Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, I pronounce you husband and wife. They kissed, brief and sweet, and Clara felt something settle in her chest, a last piece finding its place after years of incompletion. Outside the courthouse, Sam produced a bottle of good whiskey. To the Carsons, he toasted. May your troubles be less and your blessings be more, and nothing but happiness come through your door. Carson McKinnons, Clara corrected. I built my name same as I built my home, not giving up either. Even better, Sam laughed. To the Carson McKinnons, then. They returned to the ranch to find surprises waiting. Levi had sent a matched pair of silver spurs as a wedding gift, and Enoch had shipped a store-bought window with real glass for Clara's cabin, along with a note, for letting in the light. That night, as Clara and Jed stood together in what was now truly their home, she marveled at the journey that had brought them here, from solitude to partnership, from isolation to family, from mere survival to vibrant life. Regrets? Jed asked, echoing his question from months before. None, Clara said, meaning it completely. Though I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if you boys hadn't shown up that night. If the storm had passed us by, you'd still be strong and independent and magnificent, Jed said without hesitation. Just maybe a little lonelier. Clara nodded, looking out the window at their valley bathed in moonlight. The bay mare was out there somewhere, running free with Miguel's concho gleaming, a reminder that some sacrifices create beauty that outlasts grief. I was so afraid for so long, she admitted. Afraid of being hurt, of being rejected, of being seen as less than human because I was different. Built these walls, literal and otherwise, to keep the world out. And now I know that walls can have doors. That being strong doesn't mean being alone. That love isn't about finding someone who makes you feel small enough to be acceptable, but someone who celebrates you at full size. Jed wrapped his arms around her from behind, having to reach up to do so. Every magnificent inch, he agreed, as they prepared for bed in the home they now shared. Clara caught sight of herself in the small mirror Sam had given them as a wedding present. The woman looking back was still tall, still strong, still taking up more space than the world typically allowed women to claim. But she was also softer somehow, the hard edges worn smooth by companionship and love. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, horses to train, ranch work to do, a life to build together with all its daily compromises and small miracles. But tonight, Clara Carson McKinnon stood tall in her own home, in her own life, with a partner who saw her not as too much, but as exactly enough. Through the window, a coyote called to its mate, and somewhere in the darkness, an answer came back. Clara smiled, understanding now what she hadn't before, that freedom and connection weren't opposites, but partners, each making the other stronger. She thought of 5 cowboys who had stumbled into her life during a sandstorm, each leaving their mark: Miguel's courage, Enoch's redemption, Sam's wisdom, Levi's growth, and Jed's steadfast love. They had transformed her solitary refuge into something richer, a place where misfits could find belonging, where strength was celebrated rather than feared, where love had room to grow as vast and wild as the desert itself. The lamp flickered as she turned it down, casting dancing shadows on the walls she'd built to keep the world out, but which now served to hold warmth in. Outside, the desert stretched endless under the stars, and somewhere in that vastness, other lost souls were probably searching for their own place to belong. Clara hoped they would find it, as she had found hers, not in solitude but in connection, not in hiding but in standing tall, not in being alone but in choosing to open the door when love, disguised as 5 desperate cowboys, came knocking in a storm. Thank you all for listening to this tale from the Wild West. If you enjoyed Clara's story of strength, love, and finding home in the most unexpected ways, please let us know in the comments where you're listening from. We love connecting with fellow admirers of Western tales across the globe. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of courage, adventure, and romance from the American frontier. Share your thoughts about Clara and Jed's journey in the comments below. Until next time, partners, keep your fires burning and your hearts open to adventure.